Kevin Martin, he was a beast. He used to look up at his stats, say he got like 19 points. If I keep scoring, they're going to make me an all-star. I want my time to myself.
Kevin Dallas Martin Jr., born February 1st, 1983. One of the biggest accolades you can want as an NBA player is to hear your name called on All-Star Weekend. It's validation. Bigger contracts usually follow, more endorsement opportunities open up, and your place in basketball history becomes a little more secure. Even players who never admit it publicly usually care about making that team. That's why I couldn't believe the story I heard about Kevin Martin. According to former teammate Jeremy Lamb, Martin would actually keep track of how many points he had during games, and if he felt he was putting together the kind of scoring night that might start drawing serious all-star attention, he'd dial it back. The reason? He valued his free time more than the obligations that came with being an all-star. Media appearances, interviews, extra events, he simply wasn't interested. All alleged and from Lamb's recollection, but it raises one of the most fascinating questions I've ever heard in NBA basketball. Why would an NBA player not want to be an all-star? Because here's the thing, Kevin Martin wasn't some role player who never had a chance. He averaged over 20 points per game multiple times, shot the ball with incredible efficiency, and for years opposing defenses knew exactly what was coming and still struggled to stop him. Yet somehow he retired without a single All-Star appearance for these reasons. Today I want to look back at the career of the NBA player who, if Jeremy Lamb's story is true, may have been perfectly fine keeping it that way. What happened? Let's talk about it. Salute to Mr. Creative on IG for this request. It's your boy JC Stunted Growth. Let's get it, man. Like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know who I should do next. Kevin Martin was a 6'7" shooting guard from Zanesville, Ohio, known for his slender frame and one of the most unconventional jump shots the league has ever seen. Although talented, Martin wasn't viewed as a future star coming out of college. He spent 3 seasons at Western Carolina, improving every year before declaring for the 2004 NBA draft. Despite averaging 23.3 points as a junior, concerns about his strength and overall upside caused him to slip to the 26th overall pick by the Sacramento Kings. As a rookie, he averaged just 2.9 points per game, while earning limited minutes behind a veteran Kings roster. But as Sacramento's core gradually changed, Martin's role expanded with it. His unique scoring ability, knack for drawing fouls, and elite shooting efficiency quickly turned him into one of the league's most underrated offensive players. By his 4th season, he had blossomed into a 23-point per game scorer and eventually produced 5 seasons averaging over 20 points. Despite those numbers, one accolade always escaped him. Martin never made an NBA All-Star team, and it wasn't because he lacked production. During his prime, he consistently ranked among the league's most efficient high-volume scorers, often putting up numbers comparable to players who were selected. Yet, year after year, his name was left off the roster. Whether it was the fierce competition at the guard position, the teams he played on, or even the story Jeremy Lamb would later tell about Martin supposedly avoiding the spotlight, his career has become one of the NBA's most interesting what-ifs, because for a player this talented to never become an all-star almost doesn't make sense. Stunt number 1, he never chased the spotlight. Kevin Martin is one of those players I honestly never thought much about while he was playing. Not because he wasn't good, but because he almost went out of his way to stay out the conversation. He wasn't the guy giving memorable interviews, showing a big personality, or becoming one of the faces of the league. If he scored 30 points, he'd quietly go home and do it again a couple nights later. Looking back, that's actually pretty rare for someone who was one of the NBA's best scorers for several years. Most players who average 20+ points naturally become stars beyond the box score. Fans know their personalities, the media builds them up, and before long they're appearing in commercials, landing endorsement deals, and becoming household names. Kevin Martin never seemed interested in any of that. That's why the Jeremy Lamb story didn't exactly come as a surprise. Whether every detail happened exactly as Lamb remembered isn't really the point. The reason so many people believe it is because it fit the version of Kevin Martin we all watched. He had a reputation for being quiet, private, and content staying out the spotlight. Even when his production put him among the league's elite scorers, like in 08-09 when he absolutely should have been an all-star, he never carried himself like someone chasing celebrity status. And maybe that's where his career became a little different from a lot of other stars. The NBA doesn't just reward great basketball, it also rewards visibility. The players who stay in headlines tend to stay in the minds of fans and media when all-star selections roll around. Martin, on the other hand, let his game do almost all the talking. Night after night, he'd quietly pile up 20, 25, sometimes 30 points, then disappear until the next game. There were no signature celebrations, no larger-than-life persona, and very little self-promotion. In a league where personalities often become just as famous as the basketball itself, Martin almost blended into the background despite producing at a star level. I understand how personalities work and that his was more recluse, but I also can't help but wonder if that same mindset contributed to him becoming one of the most forgotten 20-point scorers of his era. Not because he wasn't talented enough, and not because he didn't deserve more recognition, but because he never seemed interested in becoming the star everyone wanted. Stunt number 2, he played in the wrong era of guards. If there's one basketball reason Kevin Martin never became an all-star, this is probably it. His prime just happened to overlap with one of the deepest eras of guards the NBA has ever seen. It's easy to look back at his numbers today and wonder how a guy averaging 24 points per game could get overlooked. But once you look at who he was competing against every single season, it starts to make a lot of sense. The Western Conference back then was absolutely stacked. Kobe Bryant was a lock almost every year. Steve Nash was coming off back-to-back MVPs. Chris Paul was establishing himself as arguably the best point guard in basketball. Then you had players like Brandon Roy, Darren Williams, Tony Parker, Manu Ginobili, Chauncey Billups after arriving in Denver, and later a young Russell Westbrook. Even guards like Monta Ellis were putting up huge scoring numbers but still struggled to crack the all-star team. There were simply more deserving candidates than available spots. That made Martin's path incredibly difficult, especially because he wasn't putting up those numbers on a winning team. Fair or not, team success has always mattered when coaches vote on all-star reserves. Sacramento was well past its early 2000s glory days by the time Martin became its leading scorer. The Kings missed the playoffs every season that he averaged at least 20 points, making it much easier for coaches to reward players putting up similar numbers on playoff teams. Take the 08-09 season for example. Martin averaged 24.6 points per game while shooting nearly 48% from the field, over 41% from 3, and almost 87% from the foul line. Those are incredible numbers, especially considering the pace of the league at the time. But injuries limited him to just 51 games, while many of the guards selected not only produced at a high level, they were also leading winning teams. That's the unfortunate reality of all-star voting. Availability and team success often become tiebreakers. So while it's easy to say Kevin Martin was snubbed, I also understand why it happened. He wasn't competing against average guards, he was competing against what may have been the greatest collection of backcourt talent the Western Conference has ever assembled. Sometimes being good enough simply isn't enough when the competition around you is historically great. Stunt number 3, he was never in the right situation. As much as we talk about individual greatness in the NBA, context matters. A player's legacy is often shaped by the situation they're in, the teammates around them, and whether their team is winning. That's another hurdle Kevin Martin could never quite overcome. For almost all his prime, he was either carrying teams that weren't good enough to matter, or playing on contenders where he wasn't expected to be the main attraction. His best years came in Sacramento, but unfortunately, those years also lined up with the Kings' decline. Between 2007 and 2010, he developed into one of the league's most efficient offensive players, capable of scoring 25 points on what felt like very few shot attempts. The problem was very few people were watching. Sacramento wasn't making playoff runs, they weren't playing many nationally televised games, and outside die-hard NBA fans, Martin's performances often flew under the radar. Then came the trade to Houston, which looked promising on paper. Pairing Martin with Aaron Brooks, Luis Scola, and eventually Kyle Lowry gave the Rockets another dynamic scorer, but injuries limited his impact and the team continued falling just short of the postseason. Before long, Houston pivoted toward a new direction, trading Martin as a centerpiece of the deal that brought James Harden to Texas. Ironically, the player who replaced him would quickly become the superstar Martin never had the opportunity to be. From there, his role continued to change. In Oklahoma City, he wasn't expected to carry an offense anymore. He became the sixth man behind Kevin Durant and Russell Westbrook, providing valuable scoring off the bench for a championship contender. He embraced that role and finished 6th in Sixth Man of the Year voting, but it also meant his days of putting up eye-popping numbers were essentially over. Later stops in Minnesota and San Antonio only pushed him further from the spotlight. Looking back, it's hard to find a stretch of Martin's career where everything lined up at once. Either his individual numbers were great, but his teams weren't winning, or his teams became more competitive after he was no longer the featured scorer. He was talented enough to be remembered alongside many of the guards of his era, but circumstances never quite allowed his career to reach that level. Sometimes that's all the difference between being an all-star and simply being one of the NBA's most overlooked scorers. All in all, I think Kevin Martin's career is a reminder that not every great player measures success the same way. In a league where so many stars chase recognition, endorsements, and legacy, Martin seemed content letting his game speak for itself. Whether the Jeremy Lamb story is completely accurate or not, it stayed alive for one reason: it feels believable. It fits the image Kevin Martin left behind throughout his career. When I look back at his resume, I don't see a player who fell short because he didn't have the tools to be better. I see someone who averaged over 20 points per game 5 different seasons, scored with incredible efficiency, and spent years competing against one of the deepest groups of guards the NBA has seen. Add in the fact that he played most of his prime on teams that weren't in the spotlight, and it's easier to understand why the All-Star selections never came. At the same time, I also think that's part of what makes Kevin Martin so memorable. He never needed the attention to validate the player he was. Fans who watched him during his prime already know how difficult he was to guard, and while he'll probably always be remembered as one of the greatest players to never make an All-Star team, his career was still one most hoopers could admire, salute, much respect, but for these reasons, his growth was stunted. It's your boy JC Stunted Growth, and I'm out.